All right, folks. I have a dear, dear friend of mine, Linda Deeken, who I knew as Linda Onsager before she got married. Actually, I don't know if I actually knew you before you got married. I'm trying to remember when you actually got married to Jason. Was it before or after Cambridge?
It was before I knew you.
Before. Okay, so I've always known you as Linda Deacon then. Okay, got it, got it. So yeah, we met. I
Yes.
don't remember exactly when, but I have had the joy of working with Linda back at Cambridge, post Cambridge. We still collaborated together, and we've remained very good friends as we've helped each other on the business front, commiserated on the parenting front, and also, trying to understand what it means to keep the faith in the midst of difficulties in life and in business and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm very, very glad to have Linda here. I think probably going to put her into an uncomfortable situation of talking about herself because that's not something that she's accustomed to doing. But I think she has an amazing story to tell as just a very, very talented and accomplished consultant and businesswoman, but also somebody who I would define as a true creator capitalist, someone who has built financial capital, reputation capital, relationship capital, and intellectual capital along the way, even though those may not have been the words that we've used. And she's done that to great effect to identify what her different is to make a massive difference for others, her clients. And in some cases, she's done a couple of entrepreneurial things in startup land, like proves the point that the average age of an entrepreneur is in their 40s, not when they're 20s or whatever else it is. And so Linda's done all of that, including raising 5 children, which include 2 sets of twins. And then, we'll go into some of the other, nuances of her family life with that. But so far be it from me to say I know anything what it's like. We have 3 children, and I'm not a mom. So Linda has 5, and that's a totally different thing. And she's navigated kind of the ins and outs of what a career would look like. And so what we're going to do is going to have her walk through what her career journey has been like from wherever she wants to start, but also kind of name the different areas and pivot points in her career where the 4 capitals came to play. And then at what point did she discover her superpower, her different that made a difference that allowed her to have, at scale, have agency for her time? And that if she was kind of running it back today, before she had kids and kind of early stages of her career in the age of AI, knowing what she knows now, how might she have done it differently? So that's kind of the ground we're going to cover, but we'll see, where we actually end up because this will be kind of fun. So welcome, Linda, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Happy to do it.
Great. So, I knew you earlier in life, but kind of tell me about the story of, because I know your older brother. He was a dear friend and mentor of mine at Cambridge, Bruce. You have a wide array of siblings. You also come from a large family, and you were the youngest, I think, of 6. Is it? Did I get that right? Okay. Oh,
Youngest of
5, 5. Youngest of 5. Okay. So you replicated your family of origin. Great. And then so yeah, was business always on your mind? I think not. You had kind of a different path marked earlier on, I think, right?
yes, no. No, business was not always on my mind. I originally had aspirations to become a physician, to become a doctor, and so I had sort of set my mindset to that. I set that from a studies perspective as I went into undergrad, into college. So I was looking into the sciences and trying to push that as far as I possibly could. I went to the UW Madison at that point as you were considering being a doctor. They had a class where you would go in and they would introduce you to the different practices of medicine, the different realities of your life. As it became clear to me just how much intervention was required, how much one-on-one, potentially surgery and those kind of vectors, I realized that my stomach did not do that as well as it needed to do if I was going to be a doctor. But nonetheless, what I found was that I really, really liked the chemistry. I really liked the science. I really liked the math. I really liked being amongst people that challenged me. And so then that's how I found myself to the vector of chemical engineering. And so I went to a place that was going to be the most challenge that I could possibly have for myself and the most growth that I could have for myself. One thing, Eddie, I will take us backwards. You raised that I am one of 5, as I have not made this connection until just this very moment, which is that as I push myself from a chemical engineering perspective to challenge myself, being one of 5, you find that at the dinner table, right, you all move very fast to consume the food because if you don't, there won't be any. So there is some just life skills that happen being raised in that household. I have 4 other very intelligent, very accomplished siblings, which meant as the last of 5, I felt, I put this pressure on myself to do everything they did and then one more. And I felt as though like that was how I took that into chemical engineering and to continue to challenge myself and do the most complicated thing that I could do as I saw it at the time. And I remember as I was graduating as a senior, And one of our professors said, well, do you aspire to be a chemical engineer? And I said, no, 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 absolutely not. No, I wanted to be a consultant because, again, it was a world in which how can I see the most challenge, the most diversity? How can I grow as much as is possible? And so that's sort of how I got myself to that vector.
Got it. Well, it's so interesting, obviously the role that your family of origin has for all of us and the like. There's a detail that I know about you that I'd be curious if you're open to talking about is that you were kind of looking up at your siblings and seeing like, oh, they were doing all these, really accomplished and amazing things. And you wanted to challenge yourself. I would say that even though we have different family of origins, that I relate to you in a lot of ways of just, I believe, and I've watched you struggle with hard trade-offs and choices of family versus, your career and this and that. And one of them, I remember you mentioned to me that you were pretty quiet about, but one of the other paths less taken was, you went to, UW at Madison, but Stanford was also on the table. And there are not many people who turn down Stanford to do that. So I'd be curious if you could unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so from my perspective, again, I was the last of five. And so I should also note that my mom had me when she was 43, 44. So she was
Wow.
not a spring chicken. So a lot of my memory bank growing up was my mom coming to events and people like, oh, that's your grandma. I was like, no, that's my mom. Mom's like, could we invest in here tonight? Could we just help me here for a second? But so what that meant is that as it came time to be a senior, time to go to school, my dad did sit me down and he said, listen, you push really hard. You have the grades to do it. You deliver what you need to do. The Lord will always walk with you. And so the opportunities that are in front of you, the gifts that you have been given, they will, he will actually take it, right, with you to its fullest expression. And so that can happen at Wisconsin. It can happen at Stanford. Make the choice that is the best choice for you. Make the choice that is, and yeah, he sort of left it and make the best choice for you. I took it the next step forward, which is make the best choice that is the most loving to my family. And that's the choice that I made. I will, in full disclosure, say, have I had moments in my time in my life where I've looked back and said, I wonder what, I wonder if. Sure, because I mean, that's always for me part of my continual learning and progress. But I have been blessed and things have worked out swimmingly in terms of coming up from Wisconsin, the friends that I was able to make, the opportunities that were presented to me. And frankly, I think it made me a harder worker. It made me invest deeper in myself because I felt like my dreams remain what my dreams were, but I needed to make them happen. And so when it came times for internships, when it came times for recruiting and pivoting from chemical engineering into consulting, I sent out a lot of interview or a lot of resumes. I made a lot of phone calls. I was the one who did a lot of that effort because my dream was my dream and I wanted to make it happen.
Wow. Well, and it's funny. I don't think I knew the story, but I don't think I heard you kind of detail it as such. And that and it's just different now because we are at the age of sending kids to college, so it's kind of odd to be on the other side of the table with this. But like
Mhm.
the part that strikes me from the framework of the creator capitalist book we have is that at the very tender age of I don't know 17, 18, whatever you were at the time, you made a choice of I'm going to call it relationship capital. Like, let me be kind to my parents and my family that way over reputation capital. And that's a lot to ask of a youngin who is frontal cortex not quite fully developed yet, and that's a big burden to place there. And so, like, I think it's just an interesting thing that you were put in that situation, and and I appreciate you sharing honestly of like, it's not a choice that you make that you never ever, stop reflecting on and there is always the, what if or what happened and stuff. And yet the uncertainty is mixed with gratitude and for what you have. And so like, I just think it's an important thing to kind of talk about is that in the creator capitalist framework, it's not clear that any one of the capitals are more important than the other. You might make an argument for intellectual capital, but they all matter, and having trade-offs is a really tough thing, but it's probably one of the early ways of adulting. So, and which, as you said, you had agency in it. I don't think I knew fully that part of it, and that probably sounds like led to you having the agency required to do the necessary legwork to kind of land the consulting thing. So you landed at Mercer, if I recall, right out of college, which is a great consulting firm. I forget if it's where in the spectrum of branding because they've gone through a couple of branding exercises and stuff with it, but like But just one of the if I recall correctly, was it Strategic Decisions Group, or there was an original name of the company,
Planning
and
associates. No, yeah, strategic planning associates was
Strategic Planning Associates, and the offshoot of offshoots of this and that. So, super highly regarded firm. Can you walk us through what it was like? Because I mean, there are going to be people that are listening that are like, how do I get to a firm that may not be prominently recruiting on campus, which I assume was maybe the case or so.
Yeah, so there's a couple different dimensions on that one. And this kind of ties back again to keeping as many options open as you possibly can and being flexible, which I think connects very nicely to the broader thematic here, right? So for SPA, then also ultimately becoming Mercer, yes, I applied there. I went through the first round. And then my brother Bruce actually also worked there. So he also had a nice conversation with folks, I'm sure, in the background with HR, like, hey, maybe just make sure to give her a second look just in case. And so that obviously we would progress there. Similarly, I was going through Accenture Consulting, and so that was more of a more traditional consulting firm route. And they recruited from Madison, and so I had an opportunity there. And at the time, it was making a choice between Accenture and Mercer, and they're similar, but at the time, slightly different opportunities, but both allowed me to be in the consulting space and to grow my expertise and grow my background there.
Yeah. No, it's great to hear that you have your chutzpah, and you made an early enough pivot from chemical engineering to kind of be able to do that. And I'm sure all the firms are like, I mean, when we were on the other side of recruiting, we're like, person smart enough to be a chemical engineer is smart enough to do consulting, which is a lot easier, I would imagine. And so
Yes,
that probably worked out well nicely in
yes.
that.
Now
And
there's a
so,
lot of case studies that I did in the background.
oh, yeah, yeah, we'll talk about that. Like, so obviously you had your brother kind of a little bit that you could ask questions of like, what is it like and this and that. But I remember for me going through the recruiting process in college was I kind of had a similar pivot where I was like, you know what? Yeah, I got my classes, but I got to just start reading books that they're not being taught, but they're going to prepare me for these interviews and stuff. And so I felt like it was like an extra class that I wasn't prepared to take, but that was how I prepared for it. Was that your experience as well?
So similar, I will say that shockingly, I started at Wisconsin thinking I was going to have just this litany of majors because I didn't understand exactly the process of course to time. I ended up just getting chemical engineering, which was sufficient. But as I got to that last senior year, what became clear to me is I also needed to learn the lingo. I needed to understand better. While I could intuit and have an intelligent conversation about the way those decisions were being made in a business world, you got to know some of the words. Like you needed to know what SWOT analysis was, case what. You just needed to know the language. So there was a handful of classes that I audited at the business school so that I could learn the lingo, have the case study prep, have the language that I needed, have the authors and the books and some of that kind of background content. So that became where I spent more of my evenings while my other chemical engineering friends were doing other things. I was auditing some of these business classes, and so that allowed me to get the tool set that I needed to be able to communicate well, and yeah, communicate well. Go
Perfect.
ahead.
I mean, what I love about it is I'm connecting another dot of on the intellectual capital front, certainly there's one argument of you study one hard thing, it's going to prepare you to learn another hard thing. So that's kind of one that's in your favor. But the very first step of intellectual capital is learning the vocab and the jargon, as you were saying, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's one of those, it's like it's not that difficult, but if you haven't put in the effort, you're gonna look like a noob who doesn't know what they're talking about. Just there's probably, I don't know, like learning a new language, 100 vocab flashcard type things of like, okay, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm not going to feel, less prepared, or I won't seem like somebody who's not prepared and whatnot. So you did all of that, and then I think the language part as a first step to intellectual capital, super interesting and super clear. And then once you were how long at Mercer? I don't remember.
That is a good question. It was almost 5 years at Mercer.
Oh, wow, wow, okay. And then so, tell me about the
Yeah.
work that you were doing there, and then at some point, you were probably had a diverse set of experiences, and then if I recall correctly, you came to Cambridge shortly after that. I don't know if it was directly from, but you probably had another education crossroads of, do I go to business school? Do I stay at Mercer? Do I do a different thing? So walk me through your Mercer experience and how that led to, the zigzag all the way to Cambridge.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say my Mercer experience was phenomenal, and I was able to have just a wide range of different experiences. So I hit the traditional, strategic planning, new product development, kind of the traditional applications of those words and those opportunities. At the time, I did a lot of work in cost cutting. I did a lot of work in organizational redesign, competitive analysis, range of different topics there. What I always have equated it back to my Midwestern roots. One place that Mercer really liked to deploy me was in organizational redesign because there's a whole lot of interviewing for individuals of what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Show me what you're doing. And there's also the intellectual curiosity that I had from engineering. Why did you do it that way? Why did you not do it this way? What if we did X, right? And so all of that kind of inquisitiveness, they ended up having me do a lot of that kind of project work. So it was on utilities. That was a classic place where I spent a lot of time is working in utilities and run rates and how system operations would be. I spent time working in manufacturing plants in terms of finding ways to optimize those opportunities. So it covered the gamut, right? But each of the underpinning was how can we make this process more efficient? How do we understand how do we got to that place in the first place? Learned a lot from that, appreciated that. That took me though to a place where it was more, it transitioned to headcount reduction and conversations of that nature, which at the age that I was, like 20 something, that was not a conversation that I was getting joy from. That was not a conversation that I was feeling this is the best use of the skill set that God had given me. It didn't feel like this was my reason. But when I would
Can
do
I
some
can I
brand work, oh,
ask real quick? Because I've heard stories. So I know what that it feels like as a youngin working with people with gray hair and trying to pretend like you know what you're talking about, and them being skeptical. I'm probably suspicious with good reason, but I imagine it's a different level as a young woman than a young man. Just my hypothesis, right? I mean, is that fair? Like I've heard war stories. I'm sure you have some.
yeah. Well, so I would say you would get yourself to a place that you would not have those conversations alone. You would always have somebody else there in the room with you. What I always found curious to me is if it was myself and a female superior, the the negativity or the accusation, like how do you think you know X? Show me why was typically directed at my senior uh, manager, right? And so she would do an exceptional job of responding to that. If it was myself and a male superior, tended to be that I received more of that feedback directed at me. And so it was an interesting, I mean, it's a loose correlation, but it was certainly one of those things that in those moments, it became clear to you of what the stature is, the way that you wanted to communicate, where you sat in that room, and being very convicted about the way that you could present the business case behind what you were doing.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'd never thought of it that way, but I can see kind of, yeah, I mean, again, loose correlation, an interesting, weird data point there. And we'll leave it at that for what it is. But, and I do think, knowing what we know now in the age of AI, I have to believe that having Claude or Chat GPT at your side to at least like, hey, am I going to say anything stupid? Like, what do I not say? Like, has got to make a big difference
Yes.
if you're a young person walking in one of these things because, like, the reality of consulting is you have to ask dumb questions or you're going to do dumb work. And the question is, do you have a safe place to ask dumb questions? And as you said, certain environments you can ask them, and certain environments you can't, and they'll bite you in the butt.
Mhm.
But you can ask it of AI in a way that like nobody has to know any better, like with it. So I think that's one. I'd
It is a
be
safe place.
curious if yeah, safe place to like hold on for a second. Let me just check something with you real quick. But okay, so you were going into so cost cutting, org design, and then I think you were mentioning brand work as part of the mix, and maybe that was leading somewhere to your transition.
Yeah. So then what happened is I had done enough of those projects. I had done good work in those projects, but I raised my hand to, our HR, our staffing individual and said, could you get me an off ramp for a second? Because I would like to learn new skills. I would like to be in a different space for a bit because I didn't want to necessarily just be pigeonholed in one place. Again, in the pursuit of trying to make sure to learn as many things as possible. And so that's when I started to do more brand work. So it was more survey consumer work. It was interviews, focus groups, and brand development innovation work. And I found for myself that I could still use the same problem solving skills that I had developed in all the rest of the work, but deploy it in this way in terms of new product work. And that I loved. And it was I felt like I was using more of my skills. I was using more of my inquisitiveness. I was being able to see that actually actualize in new products, in new opportunities, in new revenue streams, things that felt like really positive momentum that I was happy and glad to be a part of. And then that's how I then made the transition to Cambridge Group at that time, because that was 90% of what they had done. Right. And so being able to focus in that space. And then further, Cambridge Group had a unique way from an IP perspective, from a framework perspective of organizing those conversations, of organizing those surveys. So there's a lot more work and a lot more opportunity for me to learn there. That was also a critical decision hierarchy moment for me, because that was a time where my choices were I can transition to Cambridge and learn that new skill set here. I could go to business school and think about that as an alternate opportunity, or I could think about going in industry, right? And so each of those things were open to me at the time, and it became a useful opportunity to step back and say, um, like I say to my girls now as we're going through the college process, you have 3 good choices. There's not going to be a bad choice to make in this scenario, but which of these choices helps you to grow in the direction that you're striving to grow? Which of these choices are you uniquely able to deliver against, right? So that you can have, and this is again to borrow from your language, right? Where you have those God-given skills, and so how can you best deploy those, and what is your unique you and your unique superpower, right? So that's then how I transitioned myself then for the Cambridge Group territory. And the last thing I guess I should say in that sphere was I had always had in my brain that I aspired to have a family. I didn't know the size of my family, that there was going to be 7 of us, but I did know I aspired to have a family. And so the other strategic decision I made at that time was, you know what? I'm going to keep pushing on this career vector as hard and as fast as I can, because I believe that if I could go as high up from a title and a responsibility perspective, it would open up a world of more opportunities for me. And I was in a space of wanting to open up opportunities, open up flexibility, make sure that I can capitalize on those things that are presented to me. And I believe that at a juncture, if I could go have children and if I wanted to come back, get education, that could be another on ramp if I needed another on ramp back to the working force. So I was always in a vector of trying to keep as many options open as possible.
Well, I'm curious if Cambridge at the time, I thought had smartly positioned itself as, less travel, probably than what you were doing at Mercer would be my guess, right? And
Yeah,
they,
very much
I
so.
give Rick Cash, the founder, a lot of credit. Like he had a lot of women mom partners around the table there who, that kind of made it
Mhm.
work
Yeah.
and at an unusual level. So seems like some of that must have factored in at some level, or maybe I don't know if consciously or unconsciously, but like, and that now the challenge was, so I'd be curious about that choice set as a aspiring mother, and then, again, I should know the timeline better, but I guess mathematically I would have known you when you were a mother, but it's not something that I really think about
Yes.
as closely tied together. But like, it's a was that kind of your experience? Was it was a family friendlier version of consulting? And then I'm sure as you had children, there must have been trade-offs that you were still kind of navigating of like, do I stay at work? Do I, you know,
Yes.
take a leave of absence? Like, kind of walk me through that journey, which because I know what it was like to work with you. And I don't know how to say this, but your choices on the family side were never apparent to me. So on the one hand, that's I guess
Funny.
is a good thing. Like I never felt like you were, you know, like I don't. I'm trying to not step on bad things or whatever. I never felt like your mothering ever really interfered with work, or somehow you made it so that it was just seamless with that. And so like that was kind of like my collective memory of going back, where you were traveling for things. Like I don't recall you saying I can't travel for this or that or whatever else it is. And like I kind of tell me the flip side of that story that I was probably too clueless to really pick up on what was going on. So,
Yeah, so look, yeah, I will fill in a couple details because there's a couple stops along the way that got me back. So, because I was a return to Cambridge, so I
oh
went to
right.
Cambridge immediately from Mercer, and so we did a lot of consulting work there. I did a, you're 100% right that it there was more female leadership, which I really appreciated. Not only because I just appreciated the diversity of that, but then it also gave me other mentors, other resources as I try to navigate this brand new space for me. I will say that I had an aspiration for having a balance of work and home. And my mom was a full-time stay-at-home mom, and she did a phenomenal job. But I also recognized I was afraid that I would just need more multivariables for myself to be happy. So I appreciated that they had those mentors there at Cambridge. So did a lot of work there. Obviously, learned a lot in the there's less travel 100% versus Mercer, but you still did need to travel, right? And that's the nature of the beast. And it was important to be in front of clients and go to focus groups and all those good things. Did that for for several years. And then there was a stint then when I jumped ship and I went to Miller. And so at that
That's
point
right.
we were more intent. Jason had gone to Kellogg. And then we are now pivoting ourselves. He took a job at GE. So we were up in Milwaukee. So we were in the process of a move that felt like a whole lot of things moving underneath me. And similar at that time, I was found out that we were expecting our first set of twins. And as you say, not many people get to say expecting their first set of twins. So there was a lot of movement happening in my life in a short period of time. And so this was a point where I said, how about just no travel? We need to be even less. And I had never actually at that point tried a corporate job in the traditional sense of the word. So, you know what? Drink from the fire hose. Apparently, I had one more point of change. So that's when, at that point, I made the jump and I did a year of pricing at Miller. Again, learned a lot of great things in there, but also learned of my love for consulting. And so it was a good experience, but then that's when I came back again to Cambridge Group, but I came as CMO, right? So it allowed me
Got
to
it.
be conscious of my travel time, but still be able to use my past as a quote unquote frontline consultant, but write articles, engage in the marketing, engage in new thought leadership pieces in a role that let me help, be at home with my twins who were 0 and, approaching 1. So then that's when that juncture again afforded me the flexibility there.
Okay.
So many people said to me at that time, it's amazing that you were able to find that role, that you're able to construct that role. And 100% it was. I will also say it's one of those things that's when the notion of the relationship capital really came to roost for me when I think about my reputation capital. Like at the time, obviously, I would not have used those necessarily words, but the notion that people would know if Linda says she's going to work this number of hours, she'll work it. If she says she's going to get this done, she will get it done. And so the importance of saying what you're going to do and then doing and that full circle, that's when my light switch started to come on to say, hold on, you actually have personal equity and personal capital in this that you should be mindful of and find ways to monetize in a way that works for your family. Like, and that's the first time that I actually started to think about the
Yeah.
concept of a Deeken Strategies and how
Yeah.
that would take form.
Okay. Okay. So that timeline makes perfect sense, and I probably should have been like, "Duh!" But I should remember all of that. But like, it explains it all in a way that's super helpful. So like, you go to corporate, even less travel or no travel, and you have the girls, and then you come back into I think a role that seems I imagine you had a fair hand in defining what that would look like, right? And so so
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think to your point, as you said, everyone had only stellar things to memories of you delivering as a consultant. And obviously, as it's one thing to hire a CMO who has not done the work, and it's another one to hire somebody who has been in the trenches with you and knows exactly how to deliver against it. So I think your reputation preceded, your relationship preceded, and you understood the intellectual capital at a way that probably few people in call it a staff role could really, really, really get because we've had those folks beforehand of
Right.
like
Yeah.
trying to help, but they really don't have the depth and understanding of what it is. And so that was a different thing. So you did that role for how long? Remind me again, how long were you in that role? And then couple that with adding humans to your household.
Yeah, so you're going to tax my memory now. I was at least 3 years, possibly
Okay.
4 years that I did that role. And so the timing of it was such that and my kids are all 4 years apart in how they come. So started that when the girls were born and then uh about the time when Ben, the ultimate middle child was born. That's about the time when I was beginning to add other things into my life in terms of thinking about consulting. And part of it was the following, which is that I really liked, and again, for me, well, when you're a new parent and then when you're a new parent of twins, there's a lot of drinking from the fire hose. And so you're going to learn it as you go along. And so I really appreciated the CMO role then because I could have a lot of learning. I it didn't fully tax, how about that? It didn't fully tax all of my brain power. And I still had more that I was learning and as the girls were getting older. But then suddenly you start sleeping through the night, like life starts to look bright and cheery. And then I found more and more times when I would be writing about things that you guys were doing on the front lines and thinking about the new intellectual capital. And more of myself like, put me in, coach, put me in. And the more that I had that sensation, that's when I had to like, wait, hold on. So this is not fully satisfying what I'm trying to be about right now. And so then that's when Ben was born, and then I also started. That's when I transitioned and started to lift up Deeken Strategies because it afforded me the ability to be mindful and choiceful about the clients and the project opportunities that I wanted to invest myself into, but do it in a way that could allow me to really lean into the consulting, lean into the intellectual power of what I wanted to do. And that choicefulness has only become more and more important, Eddie, as the older I've gotten, because you are necessarily, as a mother, making trade offs of either time capacity or mental capacity or somewhere or all of the above. And so the importance of choices and being choiceful has just become very paramount in my life.
Yeah. Well, and I would say what's interesting to me is the choicefulness has been coupled with, I would say, a lot of courage on your part, right? Because it would have been easy for, like I think that's one of the things I most appreciate about you, Linda, is just I just think you're a person of courage where, choosing Madison over Stanford takes courage, right? Because like a lot of people need the shiny badge to validate themselves. And a lot of people wear the shiny badge and staple their diplomas to their head wherever they go in life, right? And then that's not helpful in the long run for them. And then there's any number of people who would have been like, you know what, I'm going to stay at a Mercer. It has a much bigger brand than Cambridge does, and why would I jump ship to give myself some flexibility, even though this and that. And then, leave consulting entirely, seemingly at first, to do a corporate job. It takes some courage as well. And then to come back into a staff role as a CMO, obviously important. There's a lot of courage that, and for me, what's kind of fascinating is at some level, we talked about the Stanford Madison as a choice of relationship capital over reputation capital, you know, um, and there kind of is a redux of you go from Mercer to Cambridge, a little bit of that too. You're sacrificing some reputation to
Yeah, right.
expand, areas on the relationship, probably some financial side too. I may imagine there's probably more financial upside at a Mercer at that point, but like and then, ultimately like the part that I find fascinating is that your willingness to kind of, I would say, delay gratification on either reputation or financial capital for the sake of relationship and intellectual capital. Because, like, I don't think I thought about it this way, but like your couple of years as CMO, a lot of writing. And one of the things I always talk about from a writing standpoint is like, I just wish I had started earlier because it's a muscle that you build and you can,
Yes.
I don't feel like there's any limit to how you build it. And that as a consultant, you write, but it's a style of writing and it's not long form writing or article writing or thought leadership writing. And that you realize that, like, when you're writing for a think piece, an article format, like as you said, some of the hard time that you spent learning the jargon doesn't work there because you sound like gobbledygook when you try to write that way and stuff. And so a lot of the CMO role, I imagine, is you kind of like unlearning how to write as a consultant and writing like a regular person. What's kind of fascinating for me is how many very, very smart and very successful people can write and speak in a consulting context, but you put them in front of a TV camera or you put them in front of, a blank sheet of paper and the blood drains from their face and they can't
Right.
form two sentences that make sense to a junior high schooler because they're just so used to the jargon and the like, right? Like, am I right in that estimation? Was that like the CMO role? Yes, it gave you flexibility, but to me, it was an opportunity for you to kind of really sharpen the tools from an intellectual capital standpoint, which I imagine not only good for the job, but good for you as you were like, when I launched Deeken Strategies, I'm going to need a point of view that makes me set apart from everybody else.
Yeah. Yes. No, very much. And I would say I would double click on that and say it does force you to be refined in your thinking, be refined in your thinking, excuse me, your thought process, but also own your own thought process. Because the thing I did not fully appreciate is how much you are either reading the room in as you're presenting the information, how you're reading the room of, when you work for your manager, when you work for your AP, you're reading the room of the answers and where they're driving towards and what they're positioning. And so there is good life skill to know how to read the room and construct a convicting argument for that room. But there's even more power in knowing what your opinion is, how you're going to communicate that, how you're going to support it and stand behind it. And if you have that skill set, that's what lets you launch, for me, into a Deeken Strategies where you define the strategy, where you own the strategy, where you have your own KPIs against how you execute it and realize the vision of it, versus relying so much on the room to guide your differentiation and your thought process, which is how I got much smarter about what makes me special.
I think it's so great because one could make an argument of like, if you're going to launch a solo gig, then you kind of got to, stay in the lane, leave your children aside and make it the partner. And then you launch a solo gig. But then like, I think the road less traveled for you was obviously you knew how to do the work. You'd grown up in consulting, and then the CMO role forced you to have a point of view, which is interesting because even what's kind of fascinating is that until you really become partner, maybe senior partner level, you're almost invariably presenting somebody else's POV. And so it's one of those like
Yes.
you've done the work and you begin to think it was your idea. Not really. Like the way that the senior partner role works is they have pretty much figured out 80% of the answer before they've sold the work. That's how they sold the work in the first place. And they kind of structure the work so that the team executes against it. And they're open to surprise if the data warrants it. But generally speaking, they're like, no, no, no. Tell the story that I want you to tell, and torture the data if you have to, and the like, right? So like, it's an interesting thing of like because. And what's funny is our old co-founder Nicholas Cole. He always talks about ghostwriting as an amazing learning and training experience for his own thinking and writing and like. And so some of the CMO role, clearly you're writing for others, but like, knowing what I know about what you were doing, I know more often than not, it was probably you injecting like, I think the answer is this, and let's write about that, and not just like a I mean, and this you can probably talk about a little bit of like, when consultants do thought leadership, 80% of the time, it's a not so well disguised, like, please buy my stuff advertisement and not actually
Yep.
leading thoughts that go anywhere with it. And so, what was that experience like? I mean, rat me out if I did any of that, but like, I presume that you working with other partners was a very different experience of like, I don't think you're saying anything interesting or different, and we can't be a shill or a commercial. Like, you actually have to get something provocative and different to say.
Yeah. I learned a lot about each person's personality through that process. When working with you in that capacity, right? You are unique in that you are able to pull different examples from, different categories and say, "Gee, I've seen this experience, I've seen this play out here. Look for these clues and these cues. Like you'll find it. Just look like this is how that plays." And so that is a very strong directive of how to build the position, right? Others would come and say, "Here's a lot of stuff I presented. Can you like make something out of that, please?" Right. And so it's a difference because then you also started to get a clue into how much perhaps they were presenting to their respective audience. Right. And so trying to pull the nuggets from each one of those. The third one that I found really curious is the number of people, and there must have been either some personal history or there was a little rebuke in it somewhere. Somebody over here wrote this. Write something against that. Write this thing here and take this position over here because I want to prove that thing wrong. And so each person again had their different territory, and you learn curiously because we're all people, right? We have our strengths and weaknesses. You learned where their strength points were and where their respective vulnerabilities were. With that information comes great power and nuance.
What's funny is Kristen and I watched this show. It's called Next Level Chef. It's a Gordon Ramsay cooking show and the like. And one of the things that's kind of hilarious about it is there's a theme, right? And then there's what's called the drop. And like this table comes from the sky and there's all these ingredients on there. And you have like 30 seconds to grab the ingredients and design a meal that has some
There you go.
coherence to the theme, but is also personal to you and different from everybody else, and is well executed and can be done in a time constraint. And it's amazing to me how the winners invariably are people who, yes, they're good at cooking and they understand ingredients and they can execute and all that, right? But it's the ones who are able to say, I got the theme, I can see what's on the field. And yet I have a strong POV as to like, you know what, this is the kind of food I like. This is the kind of presentation I like to do. And so, as long as they execute, the judges and Gordon Ramsay's hilarious, but invariably it's like you did what we asked, but you made it. You told a story that was personal to you and unique to you, right? And that there's so many people who flounder and get eliminated are like either they didn't execute or they like it's a bunch of ingredients that I threw together and there's no coherent story to it and the like. And so I think it's interesting that whether cooking or consulting, like it's the same, the importance of having a point of view and the flexibility to change it as necessary. But like, I feel like that's something that has always been ingrained in you naturally. There's like a strong fidelity to the truth as a chemical engineer, I'm sure, right? Because there's not a lot of
Mhm.
torture the
Yeah.
data till it makes it work. Chemistry and physics, it is what it is, right? But like,
Rounding can only go
but
so far.
yes, right, right. I don't think you can round that far up in like, but like
Exactly.
the fidelity to the truth and the having strong conviction about your points of view, but also the agility to be able to adapt to new thinking. Like it's just something that's interesting. Is I think as somebody like you who has done different things along the way, that has forced you to be agile, that has forced you to, and you've always brought through your fidelity to the truth with it. But I think the ability for you to see like, oh, okay, when, I do it this way, Eddie does it this way, this person does it that way. What's my lane of it? And so like walk me through, kind of formulation of your point of view, your different, your superpower. Because when I'm trying to remember if I had left already or I felt like maybe it was a concurrent timeline around it, but when you were kind of fully into Deacon Strategies, what was the decision making behind that? And at what point did you say, actually, there are three things I want to know. What was your decision to leave Cambridge to do your own thing? Two is how did your formulation of your superpower and your POV flow with that? Did it happen before that? Did it happen after that? And then thirdly, kind of what was going on as a mom, like, because you were adding humans to the household, right? As it were, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, that is a good question. I have to think about that for a second. I think I would tell you what stands out of my memory is after you had departed Cambridge and I remained and I was still working with a range of different people. And lots of folks have their different strengths and weaknesses. But as I had seen enough consulting projects, I had seen enough situations. I too was developing more of my perspective in terms of this is how I'd approach it. This is more efficient. I don't need to boil the ocean for all of these different things. I know how to get there. And as I had more experiences where my approach could be different than others, but I believed in my approach. And that I had more of those life experiences that I had conviction of around that. Plus, I would start to be engaging more directly with clients and customers who'd say, no, 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 that actually makes sense. Keep going on that one for a hot second. And so you started to have some more of that experience that said, yes, really is something there. What became also a juxtaposition is as a parent, by that point now I've got 5 kids. And so we are covering lots of different territory in terms of interest set. We have lots of different territory in terms of capability set. I'm being pulled at home in a lot of different ways. And I want to be because these are all very, very important humans and these are all things that I want to do. When I was younger, I would have more of an attitude of just put your head down, get the work done. That's fine. I can do it your way. I will also add this on top of it and we'll get ourselves to an outstanding solution. I had less flexibility in my life to allow for that. I was like, no, because it's actually cutting out on bedtime. It's actually cutting out on this field trip. It's costing me something in a way that I don't want for it to cost me. And as I merge those two things together, very, very scary moment to say, this is the jump that I'm going to make. And I'm going to make a jump to believe that others are going to see what my value looks like. And I'm going to have others make this bet with me as well on me in that time. That was a very, very scary moment. And I will say, you know it better than the average human because you have lived this life longer than I have in this regard, right? But you have the times where I'm oversold. Okay, great. Like you're riding high. Like people like the things I have to say. I am crushing it over here, right? Then it's quiet. And you're like, well, is it because it's November? Or is it because suddenly I have nothing of value to say? And so you go through the cycle of, hey, let's check in with this person. And so you go on that back and forth. But that process is one of just sharpening, right? It's, this proverbial like iron sharpens iron. You go through that process of saying, anybody else have this life experience? I still have the conviction that what I have to say is valuable. That's when then I would find that I would write more on my own because it helps to refine my own thinking. I would spend more time seeing what is being written in the general marketplace to see where is the opportunity statement that nobody else is taking that I believe to be true, and I can write against that. What consistently came true from lots of people, and as you say, I have always struggled with this in regard. The feedback people would tell me is, Linda, you're actually really, really smart, but also very, very humble. And that combination doesn't come together very often. And so the more that people said that to me, the more I said, you know what? I'm saying things that are of value. I have value to add. And because of my humility and the way that just, my upbringing has raised me, the different things that have come together, I am very happy to help customers and to help clients to realize their successes. That gives me immense joy. I don't need to be the person in the front. If I can be the person helping to lift your boat and I see like that gives me satisfaction, that gives me joy. And once I started to figure that out, that I didn't need to strive to be the person in the front, but I could be the smart, convicted person in the background. I had my mission and I knew how to do it.
What's fascinating about that is the way that we at Category Parts define a superpower is just very different than how most people do it, because most people would say it's what I'm good at. And we're like, no, no, your superpower is the outcome you get for others that you're best known for. It's not what you're good at and not what you want to do and not your passion. I mean,
Yeah.
those things are important and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, right? But it's the thing that people are like, oh, Linda. When I think of Linda, I think of smart and humble. I think of somebody who does not need the limelight, but will do what she can to make sure that my success, my company's success is paramount. And is somebody who, I mean, and this is the dot that I'm going to connect. That you tell me if this is right or not, right? Because like, there's, there's, there's a good number of smart people out there. They're not infinite, obviously, and they're in reasonably short supply, but there are a good number out there. There are a good number of humble people, and there are a good number of people who I would say are their aspiration is how do I phrase it? It is your success, but with very strong guardrails of and governors of like within the confines of the amount of time I'm willing to give you, because my household of 7 comes first, right? So there is this kind of like smart. So I can trust what she's going to say. Humble. She's going to put my interest first, and this governor of like, if I hire Linda, she's not going to keep asking me for work and, kind of make me an addict to her type of a thing. And the thing that she's going to do, because she's time limited, like my cooking show that I like to watch, is she's going to do the most important things first. And that when I get the stuff from
Yes.
her, it's not going to be a 200 page, like I didn't need to know all of that, but she just did it for the sake of doing it. Like I'm trying to get to like, if you were to, if I reached out to one of your great clients, Gulbins of your clients of the world, and they're like, why I go to Linda, what would they say? Is it some mix of what I just said, or like how would you frame it?
I think it's a mix of what you had said. The most consistent feedback I hear is you make me better. And so I can serve as a useful sounding board because I am honest, good, bad, or otherwise. I am honest and I will give you my reaction to it and I will have a well structured reason for it. People will tell me that I am highly logical in a way that is and again, I think my chemical engineering background had a lot to do that in terms of how you structure experiments, how you think about design, like all those things kind of breathe into that. And my focus, like their focus, is on their business outcomes, not my personal outcomes. And so, and those three things are very, very true in how I conduct my business self. And the other connection, I guess, Eddie, nobody's made, but I'll just say it for the purposes of this, is I think that moment came to me at my point in parenting because the two were connected. My consulting, so a lot of when I was watching and observing others parent, you would notice people make statements of, I want my child to do X because I really loved X. When I was young, I never got to do Y, and so I really want to allow my child to do Y. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that as a motivation, right? But I found myself different which is, and Jason has laughed at me because from the very beginning I said, I view my children almost like a consulting experience, yeah, right? And so, like, I know the SWOT analysis for each one of my children. So I can at all times tell you what their strengths are, what their weaknesses, where, like, we're working those things because in each of these cases, you are a real life consulting project, as it were,
Yeah.
to maximize what gives you joy, to maximize your outcomes, to leverage your skills and refine them, and then just smooth out the edges of your challenges, right? But it is a constant consulting project to optimize your outcomes versus saying you're going to be the best expression of me. And so that consistent as I refined that in my parenting approach, you see those correlations in the way that I consulted, which
Yeah.
is I aspire for the best outcome for you, and that's how I played it.
It's so fascinating. We talk about how languaging is so important in category design and, the simple, you make me better, pretty clear, POV for like, if your client's going to be like, oh, you should hire Linda. She makes me better. She's going to make you better. Why should it? Smart, humble, and my outcomes matter more than her outcomes. Period. End of story. That's kind of like, okay, well, what's not to like about that, right? And that it's the Venn diagram gets closer and closer to like, describe your mom. Oh, she makes me better. It's kind of an interesting overlap in terms of like, I'm sure your kids, oh, I don't know, but like, I assume they're not going to say, well, I was consulting project number one or number two, or whatever else it is. But like, like this idea of Linda makes me better, mom makes me better. And because I do think at some level the overlap is the same, right? Because you want to put a kind word into a client when they need it, when they're kind of getting beat up by politics or whatever. And you want to tell them the truth and you want to give them an infusion of courage when there's an opportunity in front of them and de-risk a situation when there's a threat. So like I think the SWOT analysis is very well framed for this. The you make me better explains what I would say is this kind of current iteration of your career, which is to say, I'm going to put words in your mouth. You correct me, right? Is that you have Deeken Strategies, and if it's, I am pretty certain it is very similar to my experience, which has been when you get your superpower right as a solopreneur, your ability to make money goes up probably ahead of what, like from my experience is like being by my own has been financially more rewarding than any other job that I've had in a fraction of the time that I would spend. And that's probably a combination that you could not get in a W-2 format. So I assume some version of that is also true for you, just given how busy you've been and et cetera. So that's, yeah, which is, and my assertion, as I mentioned to you, as when we were starting out, was like, I think you're one of the most successful alumni to come out of Cambridge, and it's probably not something that you would say about yourself because of the
Let's
humble
hope.
part, as I mentioned. So I'm going to say it, but like the ability to establish your own business outside of a brand, the ability to have clients of your own who, know you, oh, Linda makes me better and are loyal to you, and the ability to have a thought leadership perspective that is unique to you and differentiated is like, not many people get that because you have a lot of people who are successful, but they kind of have to they bounce job to job, and that doing it on your own is extremely difficult. So, I will give you that hat and that pin, whether you accept it or not is up to you. But like I will say, you're one of the most successful
Exactly.
people to come out of Cambridge. And I think it's also in part, because you found integration with your work and your role as a mom of the you make me better is different when you do it for a client and you know that those skill sets are going to carry over as a mom and you do it as a mom, they're going to carry over that's kind of what you're looking for is, the ultimate kind of, it's not iron sharpens iron, but it's this ability of a cord of three strands not easily broken, but in the sense of you're the same cord, right? Or strands of, but there's consultant Linda, there's mom Linda, and there's thought leadership Linda, and that they make you stronger and more powerful in all different areas of your life in a way that I think is unique because not only am I imagining that you are having more whatever success, financial capital, intellectual capital as Deeken Strategies than perhaps you've had in your consulting career. But you've also had a raft of entrepreneurial ventures that, like somehow you were doing more and getting more with less time. And it's kind of a perplexing thing that you've somehow, bent, some time relativity that's going on here. But I mean, am I capturing it correctly?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, yeah, no, I am definitely doing more. It has been financially a lucrative position to take. It has been mentally a lucrative position to take because I am learning more challenges and I'm learning new things. And I do think, like, I have wondered for many years, but I have come to a conclusion, which is my children have watched me as I have gone through this process. Not a lot of other moms have their Deeken Strategies equivalent. My children joke with me asking how many jobs am I currently handling at that moment in time. And part of it is because I think the two also infuse with each other, right? Which is that which I am learning and refining on a parenting and a home basis is that which I can deploy in a business setting as well. And that which I'm learning in the business setting, I redeploy back again to my family life. And so I think if, for me personally, if I always approach these things with a perspective of always be learning and always be humble and looking to the best outcomes for others, it just the tide rises everybody. And that has been one of those, it is miraculous. Yes, it maybe is bending the time continuum. You find enough hours in the day
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you get it done.
Well, you're able to do it faster has been my experience as well too, is that, maybe you stub your toe less, but like, what's fascinating to me, Linda, is like how many smart people go into consulting. I don't know if I'm using the right adjectives, but how few keep learning, are humble, and make others
Yeah.
outcomes ahead of their own.
Yeah.
Like it's not an intellect thing. It's values thing. It's a
It's a posture
character
thing.
thing. It's a yeah. It's a set of principles and beliefs, a posture that you choose with your own agency, not because you
Yeah.
have to, but because you believe in it. It's the same fidelity to truth that you had as a chemical engineer. And I think you and I share those same things of like always be learning. Oh, that's kind of interesting. And, trying to be humble, you're probably more successful at it than I am, like, but, and then putting others' outcomes first. Like, it's really striking to me how unusual, much less the combination of all three, but even any one of the three can be, because like I find people who can be successful doing the same thing over and over again. I'm like, aren't you tired of that type of a thing? Or,
Pretty boring.
they are kind of doing they think they're the master of the universe and is like, it
Yeah.
might be just right place, right time. So, take a chill pill a little bit. And then, but more oftentimes than not, that the outcome that they choose is for themselves and not for others. And I get the temptation, but curtails your long run way with it. So like I just think it's a really cool set of Venn diagram that you have. And I think a marvel for your kids to see, wow, mom is mom. She makes me better. And she does it for my other siblings. That's kind of amazing, and she does it for her clients. And like that's why I think not only are you one of the most successful people to come out of Cambridge, but I think a truly great example of what a creator capitalist is somebody who is like not defined by a W-2 or a brand, but has clearly staked out their own territory and has proven that if you put relationship capital and intellectual capital first, that the reputation and the financial capital with it, and that the people who choose the financial capital, and the reputation capital at the expense of the other two, it tends to be more short-lived, has been my experience.
No, I would agree with it. I would agree with that. For what it's worth, Eddie, I have one other jumping off point for you, which is one thing that has struck me as well is also when people see things in you that you don't see in yourself. So, as I've said, right, we have 5 children. And so first set of twins, Ben, second set of at the time, and Sarah is my youngest and she has Down syndrome. And so the marvels of medicine, they let us know these things in advance that she is coming and she will have this challenge. And at the time that happened, I remember thinking and praying countlessly, like, please, like, this is not something that I am wired to handle. This is well beyond what my capability set looks like and what my gift set looks like. And when I conveyed this to many other people, they said, "No, no, 100%. This is in your wheelhouse, and you uniquely are able to do this thing, right?" And I had concern about how my other kids would address it because Sarah does require more than the average bear in terms of support because there's just things that she requires. Right now, fast forward, I will tell you, and it comes full circle for you, Eddie, which is that the number of things you learn from watching how Sarah learns. So because speech is more of a challenge, right? And You watch the way that she is hearing things from an auditory perspective and reciting them back. You're learning a lot more about the nuance about how language comes together, the way that she can communicate with people without words, but her gestures and other things. And my kids will regularly say that she is the hands down most forgiving human in the world. And so she will be beside herself upset with you one second and then be like, okay, let's hug. We're good. The next, right? And so that taking that curiosity and that posture, as you say, right, into that posture of learning wherever it places is hugely important. And you would ask the question of like, what do I wish that I would have done earlier? What would I have done differently? I wish that I had the conviction to do the solopreneur earlier. I wish I had had the conviction that I in fact did have that skill set, right? And that I was willing to make that bet on myself. Hindsight 2020, that's a thing that I wish. Now it's one of those things that I am trying to lean into and love into my children, right? Which is bet on yourself. Always bet on yourself, okay? Because nobody's going to work harder for you than you. And so take that bet.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I think it's beautiful. And, if it's all right for me to say, not only it's a marvel to watch you do what you do, and, Sarah's special with Downs, but also with cancer that she had with it. So like, it's as if you told God, I'm not built for this. And God was like, well, here's a little extra for you to deal with. So I'm going to show you that I'm right and you're not. But like, that you were able to do that, that your kids can see that in Sarah, and that, Sarah is the evergreen fountain of learning and wisdom from that, which is just the irony of what God is like with that. But like, I think about, I have no idea how much sleep you get. I'm sure it's not enough, but it's a thing that I think about. If you knew, we talked about what you knew now, you'd bet on yourself earlier, and you tell other people to bet on themselves. And that I think that's the core message of Creator Capitalists is like, bet on yourself. That there's in the history
Yes.
of humanity, there has been, there has never been anyone just like you. And that, there may have been people, yeah, they're smarter, faster, whatever, right? But then there's never been somebody with your unique set of experiences, your unique posture that you've chosen to adopt that maybe somebody else has, your unique scars that have formed your willingness to adopt a posture that may be harder than others. And that ultimately that you have a different that makes a difference. And that if you understand that and focus on making a difference for others, that you can do it at scale in a way that doesn't require you to not get any sleep. Like, in fact, you can do it in a way that makes you
Yes.
money while you're sleeping in some cases. And that ultimately, like, again, and this is me being presumptuous, is like, I've watched you kind of navigate this as a mom. When I was at Cambridge, I was like, I don't know how we solve this. Like, if we could just figure out the mother trade offs type of a thing, you double the talent pool because it's just the simple math of like
Yes.
how do you manage this. But like, is it the case like in the age of AI and understanding what you know and betting on yourself with the four capitals that it just my belief is that there's a world where you can and maybe this is the right outcome. Like if we rewound the clock back and I'm kind of, partner at Cambridge, I'd be like, we solve the mom conundrum by saying, let you bet on yourself, start writing earlier, to your
Yeah.
point, like build your own POV with it.
Yeah.
And here's a set of roles that will either shore up a set of the four capitals that you're not great at just yet, intellectual capital, whatever, but then also, there is a world where you become a specialist in this and we put you on like we engineer the kind of part-time, let me do a staff role, which is a commonplace to no, why don't you become an expert in this? And it'll help us at Cambridge, but it'll set you up for Linda Deeken LLC, which we know and expect you to do because that is the logical thing for moms to do. Is that if more of them, as you said, bet on themselves, so start your name LLC yesterday, start writing yesterday, leverage AI to what you can do, and then, have the agency to say, I don't need the brand. I don't need the company. I can do this myself. And the sooner I get to my unique POV and the right set of postures and values, then the faster I can get there. Like, I don't know if that it's naive of me to say that we can solve all this and that every mom has a unique challenge, but it does seem like the possibilities are exponentially more available now than they were perhaps when you were starting out as a mom. But that's my assertion.
Yes. I fully believe that the opportunities are more available now than they were historically. I don't believe at this juncture that it's rote per se. I don't think you do either. But what I would argue for folks is that betting on yourself, owning your own future earlier versus we're just going to wait until the kid is this age. We're going to wait until that happens. Once I reach this, then I can do. And so adding more urgency, not in a panic urgency, but in a the world is your oyster. And as you say, you are your only you. So capitalize on it now. Right. And will there be some mistakes left and right? Be okay with that and keep progressively learning, always refining, always getting better, right? And from a cultural perspective, I fear that too many mothers say, "Well, once I have this, then I'm just going to wait until X." And it's the wait phenomenon that I think gets in the way of like the moment is now and start taking your steps. And it doesn't have to trade off with the person you want to be as a mother. In fact, it actually makes you a better mother. It helps you to be choiceful about where you invest your time and energy and how you help your children to also be their best selves.
I love it. Own your own future, bet on yourself, build your four capitals. And I think in particular, relationship and intellectual ahead of financial and reputation, knowing that the other two will come. And that I think the last bit of hope that you give is that it does not require you to not sleep or compromise necessarily. And I would say, I don't know if this is the right language, but aspire and pray for integration. Because ultimately, like my
Mhm.
view of the creator capitalist is in many respects my version of Psalm 139 of, for I knit you together in your mother's womb, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, right? And it's this ability that all the days of your book were written, all the days of your life were written in my book before they came to be. Like I know the future I have for you and that you should be excited about it. But then also I think this idea of if you are an expert on pricing, like you did pricing at Miller, you know what? As a mom, you can tell your daughters, know your worth and price yourself accordingly,
Yes,
right?
very much.
If you are an expert on supply chain and DSD optimization, as I know you once did at one point in time, is like, look, you can work harder or you can work the process and work smarter as a result of that. And like there's no I think this is the part that I feel very passionate about is that I can't think of an aspect of business that does not have some sort of parenting corollary. And that if you really kind of believe that you are unique in history, that you can niche down and choose a lane that makes you special, and that specialness carries over as a father or as a mother. And man, do you feel the guilt that you feel of like, oh, I'm compromising one or the other? That all goes away.
Right. Yep. No, 100%. Amen. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this was great. Is there anything else that you want to share, for the other mothers out there, for, maybe for posterity, for when your children, maybe when they become mothers, like what would you say about your experience as a creator capitalist?
The creator capitalist. That's a high bar, Eddie. I have to something that's gonna rational wisdom that I'm gonna share. If I can't pull from Proverbs or Psalms, where am I gonna pull from for this? The thing that I would just convict everyone to do, is be honest with yourself about what your skills are. Stay in your lane, but also maximize your lane. Like, know what your worth is and chase after it, and fearlessly so. Fearlessly chase after yourself. And it's easier said than done, but it's amazing once you take that first step. The second one's easier. The third one's easier. Now, as you say, I take them without even thinking or batting an eye, because it becomes the way that you are becoming, and living out your life as God's child.
Perfect.